The only tools you will require are two lines, each a little over half the kite's length, a pair of scissors, a weight, and a dozen zap straps. It would help if you could also have an assistant. Ensure that you're working in an open, wind-free environment. A large basement or a lawn is good, but avoid anywhere that risks tearing your kite. The first step is to lay the kite out flat, with the struts facing upward. Let's start with replacing the leading edge bladder. Pull back the neoprene cover from the first valve and carefully cut the clasp from the zap strap. Be sure to not cut the tubing, as if you do, it will need to be replaced with new material. Remove the tubing from the valve by working the lip of the tube away from the elbow. Do not pull the tubing as it risks wear and tearing. Repeat this process for each valve along the leading edge. Push the valves through the openings into the leading edge tube. The inflate and deflate valves will also need to be pushed into the leading edge tube. You will need to remove the cap from the inflate valve before pushing it into the leading edge tube. Weigh down the wingtip and open the end of the leading edge tube. Pull out the inner sleeve to expose the leading edge tube bladder. Tie one of the lines to the reinforced hole with a secure knot. Open the zipper near the middle of the leading edge tube. Remove the half of the bladder that's connected to the line. Untie the line from the bladder and secure it to the bridle line on the corresponding side of the kite. This will help later on to make sure that the bladder is installed correctly. Repeat this process for the other half of the kite. Lay the replacement bladder out on the kite. Firm orientation by making sure that the inflate and deflate valves line up with their respective openings. Accordion fold half of the bladder in 2-foot sections. Place the bladder on the opposite side of the zipper that you wish to feed the bladder through. Untie the line secured to the bridle and tie it to the reinforced hole on the replacement bladder. Place a weight on the leading edge of the kite next to the new bladder. Start by manually feeding the end of the bladder into the leading edge tube. Pull the line slowly and ensure that the bladder doesn't twist as it enters. Stop pulling the line when the first valve is about to enter the zipper opening. The valves need to be manually inserted to prevent snaring. This process will need to be repeated for each valve. We recommend an assistant feeds each valve in as the bladder is pulled through. When the end of the bladder exits the leading edge tube, untie the line and keep a little bit of the bladder protruding from the tube. Fold the inner sleeve of the tube away from the Velcro side, tucking it into the leading edge tube. Pinch the tube flat to secure the sleeve with the Velcro. Locate and fish out the valves. Do not seat the valve if the bladder material is protruding from the valve opening. Pinching the underside of the leading edge tube will help prevent this. The seated valve should point toward the closest strut. Manually feed in the portion of the bladder with the inflate and deflate valves. Seat them as with the previous valves, ensuring that the bladder material is clear of the opening. Connect the plug to the inflate valve. Repeat the accordion folding and installation for the second half of the leading edge bladder. Close the zipper in the middle of the leading edge tube. Make sure that the head of the zipper is tucked securely under the protective covering. Reconnect the inflate tubing, pushing it up to the elbow of the valve. Secure with a zap strap between the two ridges. Be sure to not over-tighten the zap strap as it will cut off airflow. Trim off the excess strap material and slide the neoprene cover back into place. Repeat this for all valves. Next, we will replace the strut bladders. Laying out the replacement strut bladders will help ensure correct installation. The leading edge forms a curve similar to the shape of the kite. Begin by flattening out the strut tube, ensuring that the valve is pointing upward. Next, pull the neoprene cover from the valve. Cut off the zap strap clasp and remove the tube from the valve. Just as before, work it off from the lip of the tube rather than pulling it. Place a weight next to the strut near the leading edge of the kite. Securely tie a line to the valve, and then push the valve through the opening and into the strut tube. Open the trailing edge of the strut and pull the sleeve out to expose the bladder. Pull the bladder out and untie the line from the valve. Lay the replacement strut bladder out with the valve pointed upward. Securely tie the line to the replacement bladder's valve and feed the end into the strut tube. Slowly pull the line to feed the bladder through the tube. Alternatively, have a helper pull the line through the valve opening as you keep the bladder flat. As with before, a small amount of the bladder should protrude from the trailing edge of the strut tube. Fold the sleeve, tuck it inside the tube, and secure in place with Velcro. Untie the line and grasp the valve. Tilt it inward toward the leading edge to push the bladder forward. This will ensure that the bladder is evenly distributed to the front of the kite. Seat the valve, ensuring that none of the bladder material is protruding from the opening. Connect the tubing up to the elbow of the valve and secure with a zap strap. Once the strap is trimmed, replace the neoprene cover. Repeat this process until all strut bladders have been replaced. It is important to ensure that installation has been done correctly. After replacing the bladders in your kite, it is important to pump it up slowly. Inspect the struts and the leading edge for an even distribution of air. If you see any part of the kite that looks like this, your bladder is twisted. A twisted bladder must be removed and reinstalled properly. Once the kite has been inflated, ensure that all of the valves are properly seated and that the neoprene covers are evenly distributed over the valves and tubing. A properly installed bladder will yield a smooth surface on a fully inflated kite. Now that the bladder has been correctly replaced, it is ready for use.